What starts as a routine first-class flight quickly spirals into chaos when flight attendant Becky refuses to serve Lisa, a successful black businesswoman, her meal while everyone else is getting theirs. At first, it seems like a case of bad service. But as tensions rise and more disturbing truths come to light, it becomes clear that this is something much bigger. What Becky doesn't know is that someone with real power is watching. And when the pilot finds out, the entire flight takes a turn no one saw coming. Buckle up, this is one story you won't forget. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love stories packed with drama, suspense, and shocking twists, subscribe now so you never miss what's next. Lisa adjusted her seatbelt, exhaling as she sank into the plush first-class seat. After a long week of negotiations, this flight home was supposed to be a rare moment of relaxation. The scent of warm meals filled the cabin as flight attendants moved swiftly, delivering trays to passengers. When Becky, a blonde-haired flight attendant with an icy demeanor, reached Lisa's row, she barely glanced at her before stating, "We've run out of meals." Lisa frowned. "I pre-ordered mine when I booked my ticket." Becky sighed dramatically. "Perhaps you misunderstood the policy. First-class meals are limited." Lisa glanced around. Other passengers, including those who had ordered after her, were being served without issue. A man in the seat next to her, a middle-aged white businessman, received a tray a moment later. Lisa watched, stunned, as Becky handed him the meal she had ordered. "That was supposed to be mine," Lisa said, her voice firm but calm. The businessman hesitated, looking between Lisa and Becky. I don't mind switching if it's hers." Becky plastered on a fake smile. "Oh, no need. She didn't want it." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "That's not true." Becky shrugged. "It's already been served." Lisa's frustration grew, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant." "She's busy," Becky snapped. "You'll have to wait." Lisa inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every stare in the cabin. Some passengers avoided eye contact, while others murmured. A woman in the row behind her leaned forward and whispered, "You're not the first. She does this." Lisa's grip on her armrest tightened. A few minutes later, another flight attendant, James, approached. He leaned down discreetly. "I saw what happened," he murmured, sliding a small sandwich onto Lisa's tray. Before Lisa could thank him, Becky appeared, snatching the sandwich away. "She didn't order that," she snapped, tossing it onto the serving cart. Lisa's patience was wearing thin. "Why are you treating me differently?" Becky's lips curled into a smirk. "I treat all passengers equally." Before Lisa could respond, the plane suddenly lurched. The overhead compartments rattled as turbulence rocked the cabin. Passengers gasped, gripping their seats. Becky, caught off guard, lost her balance. The tray in her hand flipped, sending a full cup of coffee splashing onto Lisa's lap. Lisa gasped at the sudden warmth soaking through her clothes. Becky blinked, then smirked. "Well, now you really have something to complain about." A sharp silence followed. Lisa's patience snapped. "I want to speak to the lead flight attendant. Now." This time, Becky had no excuse. As the plane steadied, James quickly fetched the lead flight attendant, a woman named Marianne. She approached with concern, immediately assessing Lisa's coffee-stained outfit. Lisa wiped her dress, her voice unwavering. "Your flight attendant refused to serve me my meal, gave it to another passenger, denied me an alternative, and now spilled coffee on me." Marianne's gaze flicked to Becky, who stood stiffly, arms crossed. "Becky, is this true?" "She's overreacting," Becky scoffed. "It was an accident." Lisa arched a brow. "What about denying me food?" Marianne frowned. "Becky, we have extra meals." "Where is hers?" Becky hesitated, then mumbled, "We ran out." Marianne turned to another flight attendant. "Check the inventory." A moment later, the response came back, "We have plenty left." Lisa crossed her arms. So, what's your excuse now? A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. Passengers who had tried to ignore the situation were now fully engaged. Even the businessman next to Lisa looked uncomfortable. Then, another voice entered the conversation. Deep, authoritative. I'd like to know that too. A man stepped forward from the first class section, his crisp suit and polished demeanor radiating authority. Marianne's eyes widened in recognition. Lisa turned to see him. The badge clipped to his jacket read, Internal Airline Inspector. Becky paled. Lisa exhaled. This was far from over. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice the commotion were now stealing glances at the man standing near Lisa's seat. His presence carried a weight of authority that made even Marianne, the lead flight attendant, straighten her posture. Lisa turned to get a better look at him. His badge read Internal Airline Inspector, but it was his eyes, sharp and assessing, that told her he wasn't here by chance. The inspector took a measured step toward Becky, his voice calm but firm. I'm Daniel Carter, an internal investigator for this airline. I was conducting a routine evaluation, but it seems I've stumbled onto something unexpected. Becky's face went pale, but she quickly recovered, forcing a stiff smile. There's been a misunderstanding, sir. The passenger must have confused the situation. Lisa let out a slow breath, keeping her temper in check. I didn't confuse anything. You denied me a meal, gave it to someone else, and refused to correct your mistake. And when another attendant tried to help, you took the food away. Marianne, still reeling from the realization that Becky had lied about the meal shortage, turned to James. Is this true? James hesitated, but then gave a small nod. I saw her refuse the meal, and I tried to offer a sandwich, but Becky, he glanced at Becky, who glared daggers at him. She stopped me. Daniel's gaze hardened. So not only did you withhold a meal from a first-class passenger, but you deliberately ensured she received nothing? Becky straightened, her defensive tone returning. I don't appreciate being accused of something like that. I was just following protocol. Lisa narrowed her eyes. What protocol says I don't get food while everyone else does? Becky hesitated, but before she could come up with an excuse, Daniel turned to Marianne. I'd like to review the onboard service records. Can you provide me with the list of passenger meal orders? Marianne nodded quickly and signaled another flight attendant to fetch the tablet used to track meals. As they waited, an elderly woman in the front row spoke up. I don't usually get involved, but this is outrageous. The woman turned in her seat, her voice sharp. I was given 2 meal options, yet this young woman was told there was no food at all? That doesn't sit right with me. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. A couple seated behind Lisa exchanged uneasy glances. Then the husband spoke. We saw what happened. She gave Lisa's meal to someone else. Becky clenched her fists. This is ridiculous. Why are we making a big deal out of a small mistake? Daniel didn't flinch. Because it wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate act. And now I need to determine whether it was personal bias or a pattern of behavior. Just then, the flight attendant returned with the service tablet. Marianne skimmed through it and frowned. Lisa's meal was accounted for, but the record shows it was marked as declined by passenger. Lisa's jaw tightened. I never declined it. Daniel turned to Becky, his voice sharp. So you altered the records? Becky's face twisted in frustration. It's just a meal. Why is everyone acting like this is a federal case? Lisa exhaled slowly. Because it's not just about a meal. It's about being treated fairly. Daniel's expression darkened. And if you think this is just about food, then you clearly don't understand the weight of what you've done. He turned to Marianne. I want a full report filed immediately. And I need to speak. With the captain? At the mention of the captain, Becky's confidence faltered. Wait, you don't have to involve him. That's not your call. Daniel cut her off. The moment you falsified records and mistreated a passenger, This went beyond you. Marianne nodded. I'll call him now. Becky's breath hitched as Marianne turned toward the intercom. Lisa sat back, watching as the situation spiraled out of Becky's control. For the first time since the flight began, she felt like justice might actually be served. Justice is closing in, but Becky isn't ready to go down without a fight. With the captain about to get involved, will she finally face the consequences? Or does she have one last trick up her sleeve? The cabin was thick with tension as Marianne, the lead flight attendant, picked up the intercom and requested the captain's presence. Becky stood frozen, her face shifting between defiance and panic. Lisa, still damp from the spilled coffee, crossed her arms and exhaled slowly. She had fought battles in boardrooms, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and faced discrimination before, but never at 30,000 feet with a full audience. Passengers whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Becky, Lisa, and the man in the crisp suit, Internal Airline Inspector Daniel Carter. He stood with arms crossed, waiting, while Marianne handed him the service records. The seconds stretched. Then, the cockpit door clicked open. Captain Robert Mitchell stepped into the cabin. He was an older man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the commanding presence of someone who had spent decades in the air. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable as he walked toward them. "I was informed there's an issue," he said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Daniel. "Mr. Carter?" Daniel nodded. "We have a serious service violation involving flight attendant Becky Simmons. Multiple witnesses confirm that she deliberately withheld a meal from Ms. Lisa Carter. A first-class passenger reassigned it to another guest, then falsified records to indicate Lisa declined it. Additionally, she prevented another crew member from offering an alternative and acted in a hostile manner." Captain Mitchell turned his gaze to Becky. "Is this true?" Becky stiffened. "I was just following procedure. She's blowing this out of proportion." Lisa arched an eyebrow. "I suppose spilling coffee on me was part of your procedure too?" A few passengers chuckled darkly. Becky's face turned red. "That was an accident." Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Ms. Simmons, let me be very clear. Lying on service records is not a minor infraction. That alone could get you fired." Becky's breath hitched. "Wait, no, I can explain." Daniel sighed, glancing at the captain. "I'll need to include this in my final report, but given the number of witnesses and the video footage already being recorded by passengers, I'd say the evidence is overwhelming." Becky's head snapped toward the crowd. "Video footage?" Several passengers held up their phones. A man in the third row smirked. "Yeah, you might want to smile for the camera." Becky's composure shattered. "This isn't fair. She's turning everyone against me." Captain Mitchell exhaled sharply. "Enough." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "As of this moment, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight." Becky's mouth opened and closed in disbelief. "You can't do that." "I can, and I just did," the captain replied coolly. "Hand over your badge and step aside." Becky hesitated, then snatched the name tag from her uniform and threw it onto the drink cart. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "All this over some stupid food?" Lisa finally turned to face her fully. "It was never about the food. It was about how you treated me." Becky scoffed. "Whatever." Marianne stepped forward. "Follow me to the crew's rest area. You'll remain there for the rest of the flight." Becky huffed, but had no choice. As she stormed past Lisa, she hissed under her breath, "You'll regret this." Lisa didn't even flinch. Passengers clapped as Becky was led away. Captain Mitchell turned to Lisa. "On behalf of this airline, I sincerely apologize for what you've experienced. This will be thoroughly reviewed once we land." Lisa nodded. "Thank you." Marianne, now clearly relieved to have Becky gone, handed Lisa a warm towel and a fresh napkin. "Can I offer you a proper meal now?" Lisa smiled for the first time in an hour. That would be nice. As she settled back into her seat, Daniel leaned down slightly. You handled that well. Lisa smirked. I've been dealing with people like Becky my whole life. Daniel nodded. Well, you won't have to deal with her much longer. Lisa took a deep breath as the tension in the cabin eased. But something about Becky's parting words nagged at her. You'll regret this. What did she mean? Lisa settled into her seat, trying to shake off the tension lingering in the air. The hum of the engines was steady, but something about Becky's last words gnawed at her. You'll regret this. It wasn't just frustration. There had been something sharper, more deliberate in her tone. Lisa glanced toward the front of the cabin, where Becky had been led away. The flight seemed to be back to normal. Passengers had resumed quiet conversations, some scrolling through their phones, others finishing their meals. A few cast her sympathetic glances, but Lisa wasn't here for sympathy. She just wanted the situation behind her. A steaming plate of roasted chicken and vegetables was set before her. Marianne, now noticeably more relaxed without Becky's interference, smiled apologetically. I hope this makes up for the trouble. Lisa returned the smile. It helps. As she picked up her fork, a deep voice interrupted. Ms. Carter. Lisa turned to see Captain Mitchell standing beside her row. I wanted to personally check in before I return to the cockpit, he said, his voice steady. You've handled yourself with remarkable patience, and I assure you, Becky Simmons will face disciplinary action once we land. Lisa nodded. I appreciate that, Captain. If there's anything else you need, let my crew know. He gave a polite nod before heading back to the cockpit. Lisa exhaled, finally taking her first bite. The food was warm, well-seasoned, exactly what she had wanted an hour ago. But the satisfaction was short-lived. A sudden, muffled thud came from the back of the plane. Lisa stiffened. Around her, passengers paused mid-conversation. A flight attendant walking down the aisle hesitated, looking over her shoulder toward the source of the noise. Then another thud. A few gasps rippled through the cabin. Lisa turned toward Daniel, the internal investigator, who was seated just a few rows away. His brows furrowed as he unclipped his seatbelt. Marianne reached for the intercom. Security check in the rear cabin, please. Before she could say more, a loud clatter erupted from the crew's rest area, the same place where Becky had been sent. Lisa's pulse quickened. She exchanged a look with Daniel, who was already moving. Marianne rushed toward the back, and Lisa, driven by instinct, followed. Passengers whispered in confusion, some standing to get a better look. A man in business attire muttered, "What the hell is going on?" As Lisa reached the rear galley, she saw two flight attendants struggling to open the locked crew rest door. She barricaded herself in, one of them said, voice tense. Lisa's stomach clenched. Becky. Daniel stepped forward, voice sharp. Simmons. Open the door. Silence. Then you all ruined my life. Becky's voice was distorted, thick with emotion. You humiliated me in front of the whole plane. Do you think I'll just sit here and take it? Lisa's throat tightened. Daniel exchanged a glance with Marianne. What is she doing? Marianne tried again, her tone firm but calm. Becky, we can talk about this, but you need to open the door. Another thud from inside. Then a scraping sound. Lisa's skin prickled with unease. What do you mean we'll regret this, Becky? Lisa called out, trying to keep her voice steady. A pause. Then Becky laughed, a low, unsettling sound. You'll see, she said. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, making everyone sway slightly. Daniel didn't wait any longer. He turned to a male flight attendant. Get the captain. Now. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. Whatever Becky was planning, it wasn't over. And she had a terrible feeling they were running out of time. The tension inside the aircraft was suffocating. The normally quiet hum of the engines felt distant as Lisa stood near the blocked crew rest area, her pulse hammering in her ears. Becky was inside, angry, unpredictable, and possibly dangerous. Daniel Carter, the internal airline inspector, took a deep breath, keeping his voice firm. Becky, open the door. Whatever you're thinking, this isn't the way to handle it. No response. Lisa clenched her fists, her mind racing. Becky had lost control earlier when she was confronted, but this was something else. There was no telling what she was capable of in this state. Marianne, the lead flight attendant, pressed her earpiece. Captain, we need you in the aft galley. Now! A few seconds later, Captain Mitchell's steady voice responded. I'm on my way. Another thud echoed from inside the crew rest area, followed by a scraping sound. Passengers whispered anxiously, shifting in their seats. Some had unbuckled their belts, peering toward the back of the plane. A baby let out a soft cry, the unease spreading like wildfire. Lisa glanced at Daniel. What do you think she's doing? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He was watching the door, calculating. She's either trying to make a scene, or she's about to do something very stupid. The thought sent chills down Lisa's spine. Captain Mitchell arrived, his presence instantly commanding the attention of everyone in the rear galley. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Has she made any threats? Not directly, Marianne said, her voice tight. But she's barricaded herself in and isn't responding to reason. Mitchell nodded grimly. If she doesn't open that door in the next 30 seconds, we're forcing it open. Lisa could barely process how surreal this was. An hour ago, Becky was a rude flight attendant with a superiority complex. Now, she was the cause of a potential in-flight emergency. Daniel took a step closer to the door. Becky, he called again, his voice sharp. This is your last chance to walk away from this with dignity. You need to open the door now. For a long moment, silence. Then a click. The sound of the lock disengaging. Lisa held her breath as the door creaked open an inch. Becky's face appeared through the gap, her expression unreadable. Her once pristine uniform was slightly wrinkled, her blonde hair slightly disheveled. But her eyes were full of something. Lisa couldn't quite place. Resentment. Defiance. Something else. What's going on, Becky? Captain Mitchell asked, keeping his tone even. You've already lost your position on this flight. Do you really want to make things worse? Becky exhaled sharply. Worse, she echoed bitterly. You humiliated me. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for this job? Lisa crossed her arms. And yet, you were willing to throw it all away over what? A grudge? Becky's gaze snapped to Lisa, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. You don't get it. People like you always get your way. The words hit Lisa like a slap. A familiar bitterness clawed at her chest, but she refused to let it show. I earned my seat on this flight, Lisa said coolly. Just like I earned my success. You chose to treat me differently. That was your mistake. Becky's face twisted in frustration. It wasn't personal, she spat. I needed to be in control. Daniel took a slow step forward. You're not in control anymore, Becky. The statement seemed to land harder than anything else. Becky's shoulders sagged slightly, her breathing shallow. Lisa didn't trust it. Neither did Daniel. Mitchell subtly nodded to one of the male flight attendants, who edged closer, ready to act if necessary. Becky swallowed, eyes darting between them. Then, without warning, she lunged. Lisa barely had time to react before Becky shoved the door open, trying to break past them. But she wasn't fast enough. Daniel and the male flight attendant intercepted her, grabbing her arms before she could get far. Let me go, Becky shrieked, thrashing wildly. You're done, Captain Mitchell said, his voice final. Sit down, now. It took a few more seconds of struggling, but Becky finally stopped fighting. Her breath came in heavy, ragged bursts. She slumped in the seat the crew had reserved for her, glaring daggers at everyone. Lisa exhaled, steadying herself. Daniel sighed, brushing off his sleeves. Well, that was unnecessary. Captain Mitchell turned to Marianne. "Secure her. When we land, security will be waiting." Marianne nodded and signaled another crew member. Becky didn't say another word, but the way she stared at Lisa, even as they restrained her, sent a chill down her spine. As Lisa walked back to her seat, the cabin finally seemed to release the breath it had been holding. Passengers whispered, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few even gave Lisa subtle nods of approval. She settled back in her seat, gripping the armrests as she tried to calm her nerves. It was over. Or, at least, she hoped it was. But why did she feel like there was still one more storm to come? Lisa took a deep breath, staring out the window as the vast sky stretched endlessly around them. Below, a blanket of clouds obscured the land, making it feel as though they were floating in a world separate from reality. But reality was right here, intense, suffocating, and far from over. She tried to shake off the lingering tension, but Becky's last glare still burned in her mind. Even restrained, Becky had radiated something unsettling. Resentment? Hatred? A sense of unfinished business? Lisa wasn't sure. Across the aisle, Daniel Carter, the internal airline inspector, sat with a guarded expression. His fingers tapped lightly against the armrest, a subtle sign of someone who was still on high alert. Then, Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into New York. We expect smooth conditions on the way down and should be landing in approximately 30 minutes. Thank you for flying with us." A wave of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers who had been on edge finally allowed themselves to relax. Some adjusted their seats, others stretched. Lisa, however, remained uneasy. She turned to Daniel. "I should feel better, right?" "It's over." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the rear of the plane, where Becky was now under the watchful eye of two flight attendants. Finally, he exhaled. "It should be over," he admitted. "But something doesn't sit right." Lisa frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel kept his voice low. "She lost everything in under an hour. First her job, now her reputation. People like Becky, people who can't accept responsibility, don't just let things go." Lisa swallowed hard. "You think she's still planning something?" Daniel didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The plane continued its slow descent, the lights in the cabin dimming slightly as the crew prepared for landing. Flight attendants moved efficiently, checking seat belts and reminding passengers to return their trays. Marianne approached Lisa's row, offering a small, reassuring smile. "How are you holding up?" Lisa forced a smile. "Better now that we're landing." Marianne nodded. "Becky will be escorted off the plane by security the moment we touch down. She won't get the chance to cause any more trouble." Lisa wanted to believe that. She really did. Then, just as Marianne turned to walk away, a sudden, sharp jolt rocked the plane. Gasps filled the cabin as passengers instinctively gripped their armrests. The plane wobbled before stabilizing, but the moment of turbulence had left everyone rattled. Lisa's pulse spiked. She turned to Daniel, who was already looking toward the cockpit, eyes narrowed. "That wasn't normal," he murmured. Before Lisa could respond, a chime rang through the cabin. Then came the voice of Captain Mitchell again, only this time. Something was wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing an unexpected control issue with our descent system. We have it under review, and I assure you, we remain in control of the aircraft." Murmurs of concern spread through the cabin. A few passengers whispered anxiously, while others clutched their armrests a little tighter. Lisa felt her stomach drop. "Control issue," she repeated, turning to Daniel. "What does that mean?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "It means something's interfering with the plane's ability to descend smoothly." Lisa's breath caught. "You think this is just a coincidence?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned in his seat, glancing toward the back of the plane, toward Becky. Lisa followed his gaze. "Becky, still restrained in her crew seat, was smiling. A slow, knowing smile. Lisa's stomach turned to ice. Daniel leaned in. "Lisa," he said quietly, "I think we just found our storm." Lisa's fingers curled around the armrest as the plane trembled slightly, the lights flickering for half a second before steadying again. The pilot's announcement about an unexpected control issue had already sent a wave of unease through the cabin, but it was Becky's reaction that truly sent a chill down Lisa's spine. Becky was smiling. Not a nervous smile. Not a forced one. A real, satisfied, knowing smile. Lisa turned to Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me I'm imagining things." Daniel's gaze was locked on Becky. His face, usually unreadable, was now tight with suspicion. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You're not." Another jolt shook the aircraft, not turbulence, but something different. It wasn't the erratic shaking of rough skies. It was controlled, mechanical. The descent was off. Lisa's mind raced. Becky had been locked away since her meltdown, but had she done something before that? Was there a way she could have sabotaged the plane? No. That was ridiculous. Right? Lisa tried to steady her breathing. The rational part of her brain screamed that she was overthinking things. Becky was a petty, spiteful woman, but she wasn't capable of putting an entire plane of people in danger. And yet, the smugness on her face said otherwise. Lisa wasn't the only one noticing. Other passengers were murmuring, gripping their armrests a little tighter. A woman clutched her husband's hand. A man in business attire muttered, "What the hell is happening?" Marian moved down the aisle quickly, trying to maintain calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The pilots are handling the situation." Lisa turned to Daniel. "I need to know what she did." Daniel nodded, then stood, making his way toward the rear of the plane. Lisa hesitated for only a moment before following him. Becky's eyes flicked toward them as they approached, her smirk widening. "Enjoying the ride?" she asked, her voice dripping with amusement. Daniel crouched slightly, so they were eye level. "What did you do?" Becky feigned innocence, tilting her head. "Me? Oh, nothing. I've been sitting right here, following orders like a good little ex-flight attendant." Lisa clenched her jaw. "Then why are you smiling?" Becky chuckled. "Because it's fun watching people panic." Daniel's expression darkened. "Listen to me, Becky. If you tampered with anything on this plane, you're not just looking at losing your job. You're looking at federal charges." Becky's expression didn't waver. "You think I'd be stupid enough to sabotage a plane while I'm still on it?" She shook her head, clicking her tongue. "Come on, I may be angry, but I'm not suicidal." Lisa exhaled sharply. She wanted to believe Becky was bluffing, that this was all just a sick attempt at getting the last word in. But Daniel wasn't convinced. He straightened, turning to Marianne. "Where was she before she was locked in here?" Marianne hesitated, then glanced toward the front galley. She was alone near the service panels for a few minutes. "We didn't think anything of it at the time," Daniel cursed under his breath. "The avionics bay." Lisa's stomach dropped. "What?" "The avionics bay," Daniel repeated. "There's a maintenance panel in the galley that links to some of the plane systems. If she accessed it," Marianne paled. "Are you saying she actually did something?" Lisa turned back to Becky. "What did you touch?" Becky just shrugged. Daniel didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen rapidly before holding it to his ear. "I need to talk to the captain. Now." At that moment, the plane gave another unsettling lurch, dipping slightly before leveling out. Passengers gasped. A few cried out. Becky grinned. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears. Whatever was happening, whatever Becky had done, time was running out to stop it. Lisa gripped the back of a seat to steady herself as the plane lurched again, this time more aggressively. The nervous murmurs from the passengers had turned into outright fear. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, attempting to reassure them, but her own unease was clear. Daniel pressed his phone to his ear. Captain, we have a situation. Becky may have accessed the avionics panel before she was locked away. We need to check it now. Lisa could hear the urgency in Captain Mitchell's voice even through the static. Get to the galley and open the panel. I'll have my co-pilot stabilize the descent. Daniel didn't hesitate. He turned to Marianne. I need access to the maintenance panel. Where is it exactly? Marianne, pale but composed, gestured toward the front galley. Behind the supply cabinet. There's a key in the crew storage. Daniel took off down the aisle, Lisa close behind. As they moved, Lisa stole another glance toward the back of the plane. Becky sat restrained, but her expression still held that unsettling amusement. She wasn't panicking like everyone else. She wasn't afraid. She knew something. Lisa clenched her fists and pushed forward. The front galley was empty, except for a single flight attendant who looked up in alarm as Daniel strode in. We need the maintenance key, Daniel said. Without hesitation, the attendant opened a small compartment, pulling out a silver keycard. Daniel took it and knelt beside the supply cabinet, sliding the card through the hidden slot. A small green light blinked, and the panel unlocked with a soft click. Lisa watched as he pulled open a narrow door, revealing a small screen and several complex wiring systems. She wasn't an engineer, but even she could tell something was wrong. Wires had been pulled loose. A few were intentionally rerouted. Lisa's breath caught. She did do something. Daniel muttered a curse under his breath. This isn't major sabotage, but it's enough to mess with the autopilot's descent calibration. Lisa's stomach twisted. Can you fix it? Daniel didn't answer right away. He was already reaching inside, carefully untangling the wires. The intercom crackled. Captain Mitchell's voice came through, slightly strained. Mr. Carter, update me. Becky tampered with the avionics panel. I'm fixing it now, Daniel responded, his fingers working quickly. Do it fast. The plane isn't descending as smoothly as it should, and if we don't regain full control soon, we're going to have a much harder landing than we want. Lisa closed her eyes briefly, inhaling sharply. The next few seconds stretched into eternity. The hum of the plane, the occasional gasp from passengers, the tension in the air, it all weighed on her as Daniel continued to work. Then got it, Daniel breathed. The moment he reconnected the final wire, the screen flickered and reset. Daniel grabbed his phone. Captain, try now. For a second, nothing happened. Then, Lisa felt the subtle but noticeable change in the aircraft's movement. The uneasy, jerky descent evened out into something smoother. The plane was stabilizing. The intercom crackled again. Good work. We're back in control. Lisa let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Daniel stood, dusting off his hands. She didn't fully disable anything, probably didn't have enough time, but she created just enough instability to cause panic. Lisa exhaled. She wanted revenge. Daniel's jaw tightened, and she almost got it. They wasted no time returning to the cabin. Marianne was already on the phone with airport security, ensuring officers would be waiting at the gate. As Lisa and Daniel approached the rear of the plane, Becky's smirk finally wavered. Lisa stopped in front of her. Why? She asked simply. Becky rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. Don't act so surprised. Lisa shook her head. I really hope this was worth it, because when we land, you're not walking away from this. Becky didn't reply, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she looked nervous. Lisa took her seat again as the announcement came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have stabilized our approach. Please remain seated and prepare for landing. The nightmare was almost over. Almost. But justice was just about to begin. The plane's descent had stabilized, but the tension inside the cabin remained thick. Lisa sat back in her seat, exhaling slowly as the engines adjusted for the final approach. Passengers, though calmer than before, still shifted uneasily. Some murmured to one another about what had just happened. A few turned to look at Becky, their faces a mixture of anger and disbelief. Others glanced at Lisa with subtle nods of support, recognizing that none of this would have come to light if she hadn't spoken up. Lisa barely acknowledged them. Her focus was locked on the small window beside her, watching as the runway came into view. Almost there, across the aisle, Daniel was already on his phone, likely communicating with ground security. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness in his grip on the armrest told Lisa he wasn't taking any chances. Marian made one final pass through the cabin, ensuring that everyone's seatbelts were secure. When she reached Lisa's row, she paused briefly, her voice quiet. "Thank you for staying calm through all of this." Lisa nodded. "I didn't have much of a choice." Marian gave a small, tired smile before moving toward the back, where Becky remained, restrained in her seat. Lisa stole a glance. Becky's earlier smugness had vanished, replaced with tight lips and darting eyes. The confidence was gone, but something else had taken its place: fear. Lisa should have felt satisfied. Instead, she just felt drained. The landing gear deployed with a faint thunk, and Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." Lisa gripped her armrests as the plane descended. 500 feet. The cabin was silent except for the hum of the engines. 300 feet. Someone muttered a quiet prayer. 100 feet. A slight dip. Then touchdown. The wheels met the tarmac with a smooth, controlled impact. The plane sped down the runway before gradually slowing, the force pressing Lisa gently into her seat. A few passengers let out relieved sighs, and one even clapped, though it quickly died down when no one else joined in. Lisa felt herself finally breathe again. But it wasn't over yet. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Captain Mitchell made one final announcement. "On behalf of the crew, I want to thank you for your patience today. We've had an unexpected situation, but I want to assure you that everything is now under control. Please remain seated as we complete the final procedures." Lisa turned her head slightly and saw Marian speaking quietly with a male flight attendant. He gave her a small nod before moving toward the back, where Becky sat, still secured. Then Lisa noticed something else. Outside, on the tarmac, several uniformed airport security officers stood near the jet bridge. Their presence was unmistakable. Lisa stole a glance at Becky. The woman's knuckles were white as she clenched the armrests of her seat. She had seen them too. The plane finally came to a stop. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but no one moved. Then Miss Simmons. Becky flinched. Marian stood over her, her voice firm but controlled. "Please remain seated. Security will be escorting you off the plane." A ripple of hushed voices spread through the passengers. Becky's jaw tightened, her breathing uneven. "You don't have to do this," she muttered. Marian didn't flinch. "Yes, we do." Daniel stood near the exit, arms crossed, watching as two security officers boarded. They moved directly toward Becky. "Ms. Simmons, you are to come with us immediately," one of them instructed. Becky's breathing turned shallow. She looked around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. She turned her gaze to Lisa, and for the first time, her expression wasn't one of arrogance or defiance. It was desperation. Lisa didn't blink. "You did this," Becky hissed, her voice barely audible. Lisa met her gaze, her tone even. "No, you did." One officer unfastened Becky's seatbelt, while the other placed a firm grip on her arm. "Let's go." Becky had no choice. She was pulled to her feet and led down the aisle, her head slightly bowed. As she passed, passengers remained silent, watching. Then, just as Becky reached the exit, a voice called out, "Enjoy the walk." A man near the front smirked. A few chuckles followed. Becky tensed, but said nothing. Lisa didn't laugh. She just exhaled. As Becky disappeared through the exit, Captain Mitchell stepped into the cabin. He gave Lisa a small nod of acknowledgement before addressing the passengers. "Thank you again for your patience. You may now disembark." A collective rustling of seat belts and bags filled the cabin. The ordeal was over. Or at least it was for Lisa. She grabbed her carry-on and made her way toward the exit. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool airport air hit her face, refreshing and grounding. Daniel walked beside her. "Hell of a flight." Lisa let out a small, tired laugh. "Yeah." He glanced toward the security officers, now escorting Becky toward a side entrance. "She'll be facing serious charges. The FAA doesn't take tampering with flight systems lightly." Lisa nodded, but said nothing. As she entered the terminal, her phone buzzed a message from her assistant, likely confirming her ride home. She had never been so grateful to be back on the ground. Daniel watched her for a moment before smirking. "You know, I do these airline inspections all the time, but I've never had one quite like this." Lisa shook her head, laughing softly. "Let's hope you never do again." She turned toward the exit, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But as she walked away, one thought remained. Some fights you choose. Others find you whether you're ready or not. And on this flight, Lisa hadn't just found a fight, she had won it. Lisa stepped out of the terminal into the crisp evening air. The city skyline glowed in the distance, a stark contrast to the confined chaos of the plane just hours ago. She inhaled deeply, letting the familiar scent of jet fuel and asphalt ground her back in reality. It was over. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Her assistant had confirmed her car was waiting at the curb. With a sigh, she adjusted her bag and began walking toward the exit. Behind her, the terminal was still buzzing with the fallout of the flight. Passengers murmured about what had happened, a few still glancing toward the area where airport security had taken Becky. Lisa knew this would be talked about for days, maybe even weeks. "Ms. Carter." Lisa turned to see Daniel Carter, the airline investigator, walking up beside her. His suit was slightly wrinkled, a rare imperfection, but his sharp gaze remained the same. "You headed out?" he asked. Lisa nodded. "Yeah, my car's here." Daniel exhaled. "Well, I just wanted to say you handled yourself well back there. Most people wouldn't have kept their cool." Lisa let out a short laugh. "I didn't feel calm." He smirked. "That's the trick. You don't have to feel it. You just have to look it." A comfortable silence settled between them for a moment before Daniel cleared his throat. "I spoke with the captain," he said. "Becky's situation is serious. Tampering with flight systems, even if it wasn't a full sabotage attempt, is a federal offense. She'll be investigated by the authorities." Lisa absorbed the information, but it wasn't surprising. Becky had crossed a line no airline would ever ignore. "She didn't think this through," Lisa murmured. "She let her anger push her into ruining her own life." Daniel nodded. "That's the thing about people like her. They always think they can get away with it until they don't." Lisa sighed, glancing toward the street. Her car had pulled up. "Well," she said, turning back to him, "I appreciate everything you did." Daniel tilted his head. "Likewise." He hesitated before adding, "If you ever find yourself on another flight like that, well, let's just hope you don't." Lisa smirked. "I think I've had my share of in-flight drama for a lifetime." Daniel chuckled. "Fair enough." She gave him a small nod before heading toward her car. The driver stepped out to open the door, but just as she was about to get in, Lisa hesitated. She turned back. "Daniel?" He looked up. "If you hadn't been on that flight," she said carefully, "do you think things would have ended differently?" Daniel considered it. "I think you would have still handled it," he admitted. "But it would have been harder." Lisa gave a small smile. "Well, I'm glad you were there." Daniel returned the expression, but there was something else in his eyes. An understanding. Some battles were fought in boardrooms. others at 30,000 feet. And some like this one were never expected at all. Lisa slid into the car, finally allowing herself to relax as the door closed. As the vehicle pulled away from the terminal, she stared out at the city, letting the weight of the day sink in. She had won. Justice had been served. And Becky? Becky had sealed her own fate. Lisa leaned back against the seat, exhaling. Some fights you choose. Others choose you. And tonight, Lisa had proven she was ready for either. What a flight! From discrimination to sabotage, Lisa's journey was nothing short of intense. But in the end, justice prevailed. If you were in her shoes, how would you have handled the situation? Do you think Becky got what she deserved? Let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love stories filled with drama, suspense, and unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Subscribe now and join us for the next thrilling story.